If you don't have a basis for knowing what you're buying, then when things go wrong or aren't what they expected because you didn't know, then it's going to be a big disappointment and potential a big loss of money too.
Hi, I'm Wade Hansen. I've been selling luxury real estate in Minnesota and Wisconsin for over 23 years. My entire career has been spent protecting my clients from misinformation and unethical practices by those not looking out for their best interests. This podcast will give you the raw truth about everything real estate so you can make solid, informed decisions about the biggest investment of your lifetime. This is the Raw Real Estate Podcast. So today I'm joined with Brett Cook from Heartland Home Inspections. Brett, I appreciate you taking the time to join us. I know inspections have been a hot topic the last 2-3 years because of the lack thereof, right? There hasn't been a lot of inspections that have been occurring, and now we're cycling back into more of a normal market. So I wanted to take an opportunity to talk about home inspections, how they work, what we can look for, that type of thing. And before I get started, maybe give me just a little 30-second commercial on who you are, how long you've been doing this, and all that good stuff.
Well, I have been at this a long time, Wade. I've got over 30 years in the inspection business, but I do come from a construction background. I have a degree in construction management. I've worked as a general contractor and spent some time working for the federal government as an energy auditor under their energy program. So I've been diving into a lot of attics and crawl spaces over the years. So.
And you've even done some education and teaching surrounding inspections, is that correct?
Correct. I'm currently working at Heartland Inspections as the CE instructor. That's one of Heartland's programs, is to bring inspection information to realtors, providing them with continuing education, basically on a free basis.
Oh.
So I've written and I teach, I think it's 15 classes on various subjects.
Wow. So you bring a really heavy background. Not to bash the inspection industry, but I will tell you, I feel somewhat the same about the inspection industry as I do about the real estate industry. There's just not a lot of licensing requirements or a lot of education or a lot of background. I could get a box of business cards tomorrow and start doing home inspections, right? Where a realtor, my last guest just said you could go to a couple weekends of classes for $1,000 and you're a licensed realtor. So that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother time, but it's nice to have a professional that really knows homes inside and out, and has a long history of inspections and construction management. So,
thank you.
What do you think the number one reason a buyer should get a home inspection?
Well, I think it's all about money, protecting your investment. If you are going to spend that much money, you should know what you're buying. And things are just in totally in a flux in homes all the time. So if you don't have a basis for knowing what you're buying, then when things go wrong or aren't what they expected because you didn't know, then it's going to be a big disappointment and potential a big loss of money too. So I think it's just about the investment, protecting the money that you're investing in that house.
What's the cost of a home inspection?
That depends on the company, but it's generally about $300 to $400.
Okay.
It kind of depends on the size of the house for one, and a little bit to do with the age of the home. And historic homes are kind of a different cat.
Sure.
And so, but it's in that $300 to $400 range.
So for less than $500 to protect, your average sale price is, we'll call it $400,000 investment. It's a no-brainer, right?
I believe that.
Yeah, unfortunately in the last 2 years that has not been a no-brainer, but we'll get into that in a minute. For that $500, what are some of the most common things that you find in a home inspection that buyers should be aware of?
Well, mostly it boils down to the small safety things that homeowners just don't even think about twice about. Lack of handrails, lack of or malfunctioning ground fault circuit interrupters, and probably one of the biggest things is just a lack of maintenance. I've told people over all the years I've done this, I said, this is an active participation game show. You can't abdicate your responsibility for maintenance. So just because the people that you're buying from did doesn't mean you should. So a lot of it has to do with lack of maintenance.
Okay. As a homeowner, I guess, what can I do to prevent some of those most common issues that come up. Obviously, routine maintenance is really important. It's one of the things I've learned in the 25 years doing this, right? I hire a professional every year to come in and tune up the furnace, tune up the AC. I've found that just routine maintenance is important. But as a homeowner, I'm going to get my home ready for the market. What are some of the things I should be doing maybe to prevent some of those issues coming up?
Well, I would suggest getting a home inspection.
A pre-inspection?
A pre-inspection, yeah. Then you're not blindsided by it. Even whether you as the seller choose to do anything about it or not is one thing, but at least you won't be blindsided by somebody, because the emotions of a buyer, what I've learned, and I'm sure you have too, is that some things will trigger some people a lot and others not at all. And that's all the way from a cracked outlet to an asbestos nightmare in the basement. So if you want to really kind of be prepared for, that, know what's going to come up, so that when the people are going, oh my gosh, you've got this bad outlet in the bathroom, you go, well, at least you knew about it.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think every buyer, every individual has a certain threshold of, I guess, acceptance when it comes to certain things. I've become numb to inspections, right? I see just about the same 10 things in every inspection now. Right. And I always look for those 2 or 3 things that are outside of those top 10 that I see. Those are the things that I look for on behalf of a buyer that I think are, worthy of asking for fixes. And the other thing I'll challenge you on in a pre-inspection, and this isn't directed at you, this is more directed at the industry. Sure. There's bad inspectors out there, and it's really just an opinion as to the condition of somebody's home. And if you get a bad inspector with a bad opinion, you could potentially uncover issues that really aren't even there. So I've just seen too many bad inspectors, just like I've seen too many bad realtors, right? That's a little bit. If you have a good inspector do a pre-inspection, I totally agree with your comments. Unfortunately, there's some bad eggs out there, but it's a good advice, good tip.
And I'm not here to defend all inspectors.
Yeah, and I'm not here to bash all inspectors, right?
Or to bash them. It's back when we first started doing this in the 80s. The real estate industry looked at every one of us as bad people. Yeah. We were going to come in and screw up a deal, Mm-hmm. And that wasn't ever the intention, but because of some of the bad players that were, in the whole real estate industry, there's bad title people,
sure.
And bad inspectors, there's bad municipal inspectors too.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So I get it, but it's just kind of a thing that happens in life, I guess,
For sure. And I will say that I've never purchased a piece of real estate without going through a home inspection. So I would 100% recommend anybody that buys a home or gets a home inspection. Now, that being said, you brought up an interesting statistic about the last 2 years. And I'll let you throw that statistic out there, but I also heard a statistic to kind of dovetail off of what you're about to tell me, that I believe 1 out of every 3 buyers that purchased a home the last 2 years is very, very unhappy with their purchase. Mm-hmm. They just kind of jumped on the FOMO, fear of missing out, right? They thought this market was the opportunity to jump in and buy something, and They got in over their heads. And you'd mentioned something about the number of inspections that did or did not occur the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I'm not sure where this statistic came from, Wade, but it was 58% of the inspections over the previous 2 years of 2021 were not inspected. But now the lawsuits are starting to ramp up as a result of people not having that inspection, suddenly finding out they've got a damp basement or they've got a damaged furnace or some big thing. They may be able to get over a broken light fixture knowing that they accepted it, but they can't get over the big things. And, that's human nature. We want to kind of avoid blaming ourselves for it, So, so that 58% is what's generating a lot of these lawsuits. Now, the other statistic that I heard to that is now we're down to about 20% not being inspected in this last 1 year period. So it has switched around.
Okay. So about 20% of the homes being transacted today don't get an inspection, 80%
Correct.
Do. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, I think I bet when that statistic comes out, we'll say by mid-year, I'll bet that's closer to 95%. It's getting to be more of a normal process, which I think is great. So,
But I also think that part of that 20% is there's always going to be a certain percentage that don't get inspected, because you'll have real savvy buyers that will say, this place is going to get gutted out anyways. I don't really care. I know what I'm buying. This is my 150th house, that sort of thing. I just had a conversation yesterday with one of the Heartland inspectors that one of the buyers was saying, do I really need to get a truth in housing evaluation on this house, because it's going to get torn down?
yeah.
So do I really need to do that? So there are savvy people out there that there'll always be 5-10% that don't inspect.
Yeah. You brought up a good one, truth in housing. Tell me a little bit about what that is.
Well, I think the thing that you have to realize with truth and sale of housing reports is that it's the truth about the house according to that municipality. It's not the truth about the house, it's the truth in comparison to their housing code. So it's a little bit of a misleading name, but it's a way of the cities to kind of make sure that their housing stock that's being sold aren't completely dilapidated pieces of junk, that there are some safety things. There aren't many things in those truth and sale of housing, and I think there's 13 cities in the metro area here that have that, or some variation of it. And there are very few things within that report that has to be corrected. So it's really just a statement by the homeowner, according to the inspector that made the comparison to that particular city's housing code. So I think it's a good thing, but it's not what you'd say is like the truth about the whole house. It's just what's on those 60 or 70 lines of that housing code.
So back up even further and just give me the snapshot and the definition of what a truth and housing report is and how it came about. I've been doing this 25 years. The first half of my career, I never heard of such a thing, and now they're becoming more normal. Like you said, there's 13 municipalities that require those to be done. So tell me exactly what they are and how they became a thing.
Well, I think that they started, the first ones were Minneapolis and St. Paul, and that was aging housing stock. That the 80s, when that's really kind of ramped up in the late 70s, there was a lot of consumer advocacy things going on. And one of the big ones was housing purchases. The private housing industry was a few years down the road. And when I started in it, we actually used the truth and sale of housing form for the format for our original reports, because it seemed like at the time a good basis for what you might consider to be the basic condition of a home. So it was kind of that consumer advocacy that brought it about, because there's just a lot of crummy housing being sold, and no one to look out for these people. I thought it was a good thing, I'm sure that the other 11 municipalities have dovetailed off of Minneapolis and St. Paul, because it's just been around for so long and it's been considered a standard in the real estate industry now.
Right. And now a lot of cities are starting to get into requiring sewer scopes. Am I correct in saying that? How many approximately are doing that now?
There's 4 that I know of. I think it's Golden Valley, Mounds View, West St. Paul, and Orono, I think.
Yeah, it's like Orono or Minnetonka or one of those. I think it's Orono as well. Yeah,
Orono, right? Yeah.
So really not much on the east side here that's started to do that.
No, just except for West St. Paul.
And you guys offer sewer inspections as well?
Yes.
Or sewer scopes, excuse me.
Yes. Yeah. Which is one of the things, I think the greatest things that's happened to the inspection industry is sewer scopes, because I spent 25 years of people saying, "What's with the sewer? What's the condition of the sewer?" And I said, "I don't know."
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't see in there. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you. And now we put a scope down there, and we can really tell. The requirement by the cities, the 4 cities, was in relationship to those cities being billed enormous amounts of money from the Metropolitan Council for excess water entering their treatment systems. And they said, "Whoa, we can fix the stuff in the street, but we know there's water coming from between the house and the street, and we're going to put that on the homeowner." So,
So what are you finding mostly in those sewer scopes? Tree roots, things like that?
The big one is tree roots, yeah. The only thing that I think is kind of a little wrong with that process from the cities now is that they've identified anything as a water entry point. It's called a water intrusion inspection. And so even if you have little teeny roots coming in through a joint in an old clay tile sewer, they feel that's a failure and you need to do something about it. Can't just clean it out, because that's going to be a water entry point, no matter how minute it is. Now if it's a broken line, a big chunk missing, it's collapsed or something like that, I get that. But they've just said, okay, anything is a failure, you need to fix it.
Define fix. Does fix mean replacing that sewer line?
Replacing that section of the sewer line, or relining that portion of the line.
Okay.
So
if it's a municipality does not require a sewer inspection or a certificate of compliance on the sewer scope, and a buyer does the sewer scope, you're just looking mainly for tree roots, crack lines, things like that.
Anything that stops the flow of waste.
Okay.
So if it's a low spot, it's a blockage and something. And we found some pretty weird things, old broken snakes, people trying to clean their own, lines, wads of, like diapers that got jammed down in there, We found a lot of things, collapsed lines, especially in the old clay lines. I would think that the vast majority of them end up as just being, you've discovered that every 2 or 3 years you need to have this thing cleaned.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a big plus from having the scope done anyways. Whether we identify some huge problem or not, we've identified some way for you to keep that from, like my experience when I used to live out in Orono, is the sewer line backing up on Thanksgiving Day when I had a house full of 20 people, so.
That's an interesting Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
That's almost as bad as talking politics on Thanksgiving, right? It's a shitty subject, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway.
Right.
So, sewer scopes, tell me, outside, what isn't included in a standard home inspection? What would be considered, I guess, add-ons or outside the scope of your standard home inspection?
Well, environmental testing is definitely outside of it, such as mold, that sort of thing, air quality testing. So environmental testing. Now, all of these things that are considered outside of the scope of a normal inspection are generally in some way touched upon in your basic inspection. Because like a camera inspection of a chimney flue is outside of the normal inspection. That's an extra add-on cost. But your inspector is, a good inspector, of course, is always going to try and make some effort to see what's going on with that flue. Mostly from the roof. If he can, he's going to try and get a look up from the firebox. So they're going to look at the fireplace, but the flue exam, the video exam of it, that's outside of it. Certainly the sewer scopes are outside of it. Anything environmentally like water would be also outside of it too. Now, putting that in perspective, a general, say an American Society of Home Inspector protocol inspection is going to touch on all these things, but home inspectors are like general practitioners. And he's going to go in there and he's going to say, in my experience, this furnace is not functioning the way it should. It looks like it's been poorly maintained. And then he's going to say, I'll advise further inspection or testing of this. So that's going to be outside of it too.
Okay.
So if the inspector goes on and says, well, look at this electrical system, you really need to evaluate, have a professional electrician evaluate this and then take it to the next step and give you a pretty close cost of what it would take to cost to cure, then that's going to be outside the inspection too.
Is there anything in the inspection industry that's kind of frowned upon for you guys as inspectors to comment on or inspect?
Well, the big one is should I buy this house? It's not our place to tell you whether it's a good deal or you should buy it. The big one that I always hated was, would you let your daughter buy this house?
Oh.
My God. And the truth is that every house is either a good or a bad purchase, depending on what the buyer's expectations are, what the deal is, what the money that's being involved in terms and stuff like that, and what they want out of the house. It could be good, could be bad, So I think that's the absolute biggest no-no is we're not out there to tell you to buy that house or not. We're out there to be a third-party, neutral information source to give you the tools to decide whether this is a good deal for you or not.
So to kind of dovetail off of that a little bit. We talked a little bit when we first sat down about, I as a realtor, I don't go to inspections. I've been to probably a handful of inspections in my 25 years in the industry. A couple of them were mine. A few of them were relocation clients that wanted me to go on their behalf. I think personally, the buyer's paying for the inspection. The buyer needs to get a third-party, unbiased opinion as to the condition of the home. And I think having that realtor in there trying to stick their nose in a place where maybe it just doesn't belong. It's almost like an inspector guiding a buyer on how to construct a purchase agreement, right? I think that's my opinion. Tell me a little bit about what you would like to see from your buyers. Do you want them there? Don't you want them there? Do you want your realtors there? Don't you want them there? Trust me, not everybody has to be like me, right? I just think that's my opinion. I think being there is the wrong thing for me as a real estate professional.
Right.
So.
Well, it was really interesting. You know, I had my opinion of, for many, many years, I was like, I wanted those clients to show up right away. I wanted them to participate in this activity, you know, because if I stood there and went, look at that, it's very hard to convey that in a picture, you know. What we found over a couple of years during the COVID thing, because essentially when COVID ramped up and everybody was sick, and there was several months there where basically everybody that was involved in home inspections in the Twin Cities area, we had a big powwow, and everybody got together and said, you know, we can't kill our industry here, but there's all these health concerns, you know, the health of the homeowner, the health of the buyer, the health of us, you know. And some of the protocols that came up have kind of lagged over. Mm-hmm. And one of them, I think, that has worked out really well is that we request, at least at Heartland, is that a buyer doesn't show up for the first hour. It gives the inspector a chance to really walk around, get the big picture, do some of the things that the homeowners can't, or the buyers can't be involved in anyways. You know, going in a crawl space, going up an attic, going on a roof, that sort of thing, you know. And believe me, I've gone up on a roof and turned around and there was the buyer, you know. No, but so that's worked out. But my personal opinion is it is useful, depending on the buyer, it is useful for the realtor to show up at the very end or near the very end. Like you say, not to insert yourself in the inspection process, but to be there, because now a lot of times buyers get really emotional towards the end. You know, what do I do? And they're like paralyzed. You know, they're going out the door like a zombie because they don't really know what to do. And I don't know the emotions of that person. I met them when we walked up the driveway, you know, whereas a realtor, they do. Mm-hmm. And they can say, we'll work this out, what do you know, that sort of thing, and kind of deal with it there, because I've had clients over the years that by the time they got home, they were so wound up that they were like freaking out, you know. And so my opinion is for the agent to be there at the very end or something like that would be useful.
Sure.
But you have to evaluate your own client.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, that's, and you know, like I said, every agent's different, and you know, I always
and every client, every buyer's different.
And I just always try to tell my clients, you know, the inspection process is a very emotional process. They're gonna really rip this house apart and make it look ugly, and that's their job. And you know, this is your opportunity to decide if you still want to buy that ugly house, right? I mean,
you know, I think that's a really good point. And that is certainly not the intention of an inspector, is to rip this house apart, you know. But the truth sometimes is ugly.
Yeah.
But like I said before, sometimes ugly to one person is not so ugly, and sometimes really ugly to somebody else. That, you know, the truth will set us free, right? You know, and it's, but it's, I mean, I have, you know, been at this long enough, so I know there are inspectors out there that their intention is to sensationalize everything, you know, like make a bad outlet look like a major deal. I mean, it's an ego thing with some guys, you know, and so it's unfortunate that kind of it's still in play. But really, the bottom line for a good inspector is not to make anything look ugly. It's just to give information. You know?
And I've been at this long enough to know that there's some realtors that will make something that should be an issue brush it aside and make
Oh,
it a
yeah,
non-issue,
yeah.
right? And that's kind of why going to the inspection, sometimes they'll just, oh, that's not a big deal, let's just move on. Well, it could be a big deal to that particular client, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
a lot of
absolutely.
times it's just getting that report, looking at the report, digesting some of that information, doing some research on some of that information. I know you guys do a good job of providing them additional areas they can find information on whatever you find in that report, and allowing them to do their due diligence and their homework and really decide if that ugly house is now something they still want to buy. So, and I you know, like you said, every buyer's different, every agent's different. So, tell me a quick story about something, the most unique thing that you've discovered in an inspection.
Well, I don't know how much time do we have here.
I'm sure you have multiple stories, but anything stand out to you?
Well, I don't really know if I can pick one that stands out. Probably one of the more emotional ones was, I remember it was the cutest little house in Wayzata, older 1920s. Had a really nice fireplace in the living room, and this house was just as neat as a pin, right? And so I couldn't get to the roof to look down the flue, so I wanted to take a look up the flue, check the damper, check the firebox, that sort of stuff. And I started to open the flue, and it wouldn't open up. It wouldn't open up, and I kept going like this, and I kept just thump, 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 thump. Well, it turns out there was a raccoon with a nest full of babies right above the damper, and as I banged her in the head the last time, her claws came down and she was screaming and she took a swipe at me, and as I went out with my head, I banged into the top of it. All the soot came down, the creosote landed all over the perfect white carpet. It was in my hair, it was all over me, it was all over the carpet. And then, of course, I had to shut the thing again, you know, so I had to reach in there again because, you know, I didn't want a sooty raccoon running around inside this house, you know. And let's just say we paid to have, because you can't get creosote out of a white carpet.
Yeah, you're replacing those carpets.
Replace the carpet, yeah. That kind of sticks out in my mind.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Because every time I drive down Highway 12 going into a long lake, I see that house. So it's kind of hard to avoid.
What happened to the raccoon?
Well, they called a pest control person, and they've got their ways, you know, to do it humanely.
That being said, I know one of the most common things not most common, but what can be very common in fireplace chimneys are like bats, right? Mm-hmm. And bats are protected, right? So there's a certain way we have to go about removing bats from a home, right?
Yeah,
Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah.
I've only had it a few times, but tell me a little bit more about that.
And you can find anything in there: squirrels, bats, birds, raccoons. You know, I mean, there's a lot of things that I think that's a really nice warm spot to go down into, you know. Yeah. Probably the biggest thing is birds down chimney flues, you know. I mean, I have opened up chimney dampers and had like 10 dead birds fall out, you know.
How do I remove bats from a chimney?
Call the pest control people.
And they got to do it humanely, right?
Right.
Yeah. Relocating them or whatever.
I don't know if they just like go... And they fly out. I really don't know, you know. By then I'm just going like, you got a lot of stuff in your chimney, you need pest control.
So I want to back up just a little bit. The one thing you guys don't test for in a standard home inspection is air quality. So radon is a big issue, obviously.
Yep. That's an add-on service also.
Right, an add-on service. A buyer can do a radon test, and a radon test consists of leaving a radon test in the home for 48 hours to test the air quality for radon, correct?
Correct.
Can you just give, from a consumer's perspective, what radon is, how it came about? I know in the 2000s we started, the building industry started to have a code for passive radon mitigation systems. Mm-hmm. When was that? What year was that? So they can, was that 2005 or 6?
Something like that.
Okay, and just talk a little bit more about just radon. Well,
radon is a naturally occurring gas that's generated by the breakdown of radium in the soil. So it's a nuclear breakdown. It's been here for eons. Unique position that we're here in Minnesota is that we experienced this glacial activity 10,000 years ago, and a lot of this radium-bearing soil was pushed over here, dragged out of there, and so we don't really know where it is here. We just know that geologically that this is a medium to high probability area to have soil that's radium-bearing. And what happens is these virtually all homes are under some sort of a negative pressure. And that negative pressure then, the soil gas is being drawn into the house through little nooks and crannies and cracks and fissures in the foundation and under the slab and stuff that those radium particles, those radioactive particles, then attach themselves to a little dust mote. And we think we're in a pretty pristine environment when it's filtered air, but there are dust motes in the air, believe me. And they attach themselves to that, and then the problem is that we inhale that. And then those little dust motes with the radium-bearing material on them get stuck in our lungs. It creates kind of a lesion on our lung, and the potential is lung cancer. So we don't know where it is. The only way that you can really know is to test. The tests that we use now are pretty sophisticated. 20 years ago, we used to set charcoal canisters to absorb it. Now we're using electronic monitors that can give a legitimate 48-hour window, a picture of what was going on in that window of time. And because those monitors now are measuring the radon, they're measuring pressure, humidity, and temperature. And so if something, years ago when we used to set charcoal canisters, the whole thing was about tampering, and like it goes back to the old thing about, the solution to pollution is dilution. And so people would like open the windows, or they'd put a plastic bag over the top of the canisters or buckets or something or other, Well, now the electronic monitors will measure the weather, the temperature, the pressure, and if suddenly there's a pressure change, the technician is able to look at it like, well, weather statistics show that nothing happened here. So what happened? If there's a big, huge temperature swing, it may be because the window was open, that sort of thing. So it gives a real legitimate 48-hour tally of what's happening to that, because we don't know. The only way to know, and you could go down a block in a development, and it might skip every other house, might have 10 houses and then 10 houses. You just don't know, because part of the other problem is that in developments, sometimes a filter will be hauled in that has radon-bearing material in it. So you might have imported that.
Interesting.
So.
Interesting. And so now, if I'm a home buyer, and I buy a home that was built after, I think it's 2006, I think is the date. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Something
it's
like
right in
that,
there.
yeah.
The code is to have a passive radon mitigation system in the home.
Right.
Some do have active systems, correct?
Correct.
Tell me the difference between passive and active.
Well, essentially, the idea behind any system is to collect that radon-bearing gas before it gets into the environment. So the passive system is basically a tube, 4-inch tube, that's buried in the concrete floor to, say, a collection pit that's underneath there. And with most modern homes, they have sump systems, which is a perforated line that goes all the way around the perimeter of the foundation. And that acts as kind of a collection system that brings that gas back to that central point. The idea behind a passive system is that it will just passively exhaust itself up and out the roof. So it has to exhaust someplace outside the house, not on a patio, not near a living space, not near a window or a door. Like you said, sometime in 2005, 2006, I can't remember, the code changes every 3 years.
Yeah.
So it's someplace in there they said, well, we'll do the passive thing. That's not a burden on the builders, because builders will, anything that adds $1 to their cost is going to be resisted. It's like when they tried to propose fire sprinklers, fire suppression in a house. Builders went, oh no, man,
Right.
It's going to save your house, going to save your life, but it's money, right?
Right.
So they put this passive pipe in, knowing that if the buyer tests that house and it proves to be negative, there's no elevated radon level in, they're good, they're done, it's taken care of. Either they don't have it or the passive system is exhausting it. But if it is higher than normal, then that tube, which is really the hard part of installing any active system, is already in. And then they add a fan to the system that then depressurizes that system mechanically and exhausts it out. So part of it is that the builder has to embed that tube in the floor, and then they have up in the attic, because that fan that you see associated with active systems can't pressurize the system. It has to be outside the living space and depressurize the system. So they usually say, well, they'll go up in the attic. So the thing is, they put the tube in and they put an outlet in the attic, so that if this thing needs the fan, all they got to do is cut the pipe, put the fan in, and it's a done deal. And active systems are extremely effective in reducing radon levels.
And builders nowadays have to put actual electricity, a little box up there
Yep.
for the fan, the future fan to go in, so it's
Yep.
easy to install that fan, correct?
Yep, yep.
So there's not a lot of work to install the fan, it's just cutting the pipe, putting the fan in, plugging it in, right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. You talk a little bit about the threshold. Threshold is still 4.0 PCIL.
4.0,
Tell me a little bit, so below 4.0 is good, above 4.0 is bad.
Well, here's the rub is that you know, back when we first started measuring radon in the 80s, the EPA, World Health Organization, said 0 to 10. If it's above 10, it gets to the between 4 and 10, you might want to do something, but you know, below 4, you're okay. But now they've just taken that 10 thing out. They've said that we have a number of years of epidemiology now that says that there's a direct correlation between exposure to radon levels above 4, and you need to do something about it. That's our action level. Now, any test can vary a little bit. The problem for you as a salesperson to help negotiate that with your buyer is 3.9 okay and 4.1 not?
Right.
You know, and at that point, if they're just saying, listen, this is you know, especially if you have a passive system already in, you know, you're probably talking $600-800 to finish out the system. A new system is probably going to be $1,500 to $2,000. If that number is unacceptable, then you may want to put in a longer test. Sure. You know, and get a more accurate idea. You know, because if they say, well, that 3.9 is okay. Well, you know, yeah, it was 1.9 maybe, but at 3.9 is kind of on that cusp of, you know, just the margin of error kind of a thing.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So
if I don't have a radon mitigation system in, on average, it's about $1,500 to $2,000 to put one in?
Yeah, it's kind of about access.
Sure.
You know, I mean, if it's an easy access, or I see a lot of the older homes in say, South Minneapolis and St. Paul, where they'll come up out of the floor and they'll go right out through the floor joist and up the outside of the house, rather than try and find a closet, you know, put it in the corner of the kitchen, something like that, frame around it, that sort of a thing. And then it's pretty straightforward. You know, all they got to do is bury that pipe, dig out a little pit, bury that pipe. It's all PVC. It's not a high expense material.
Yeah.
The most expensive part of it is the fan. As long as the fan's outside the living space and it's depressurizing the stuff that's inside, then that's fine. So that's
yeah,
probably a common.
I lived in a house
cost.
with an unfinished basement built prior to 2005 or 2006, and of course that's where I had my gym equipment. I'd work out down there, and I think I was doing myself good, right? And I went to sell my house and wanted to test it for radon before I tested, and it came in around 12. So here I'm working out and radon, right? So we did put a radon mitigation system in. It was about $1,600.
Yeah.
We went from a 12 to under 1.
Yep.
So they're very effective, and it's a very inexpensive way, I think, to add value is probably the wrong word, but just make your house more saleable, livable, and
Well, and you know, the health organizations say that it's second only to smoking and lung cancer. So, you know, and especially, and if you're a smoker, you're kind of doubly screwed here because it compounds that. You know,
Right.
so. Yeah, I mean, if there would have been a fad back in the 80s and it kind of went, yeah, well, no big deal,
Right.
you know, but there's more studies, more information. It's been around for a long time. We've thought about it for a long time.
what's the highest reading you've seen?
I think the highest reading I've seen is about 40.
Wow.
And I think that was up in the, kind of up more in the St. Cloud area.
Okay.
That's a kind of a radon, high radon area is up in St. Cloud.
I've heard that if I leave a radon test in a home for 48 hours, and during that 48 hours we have a thunderstorm with rain, that it can increase or skew that radon test. Is that a true statement?
I don't know that it's true across the board. You know, it kind of depends on the soil moisture. So it can skew it a little bit, you know, and that's where this kind of that borderline thing comes in. We had a big weather event. The pressure dropped dramatically. There was a high moisture content. The relative humidity went up. You know, if you're still coming in at 1.9, you know, then that weather skew probably is not that big of a deal. Or if it's coming in at 12, same thing, you know. But if it's kind of in that border, I mean, the technicians nowadays are trained really well. You know, it's third-party training. EPA does not train them. It's really extensive, you know, and it's really regulated heavily too. So it's kind of an interpretation on the tech's part.
Bert, I feel like I could talk to you for hours. You have a lot of good information and a lot of experience and knowledge, and I think that this has been very valuable to my viewers. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and come on, and look forward to working with you guys on down the road.
Well, I'd be happy to come back, and we do have 15 classes that I teach. I can always get into those too. So
Might have to do it. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ed.
Thank you for listening to the Raw Real Estate Podcast. If you have any feedback for this episode or want to suggest a future topic or even possible guests, head to wadehansen.com. There you can get links to my Facebook and LinkedIn pages. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel to see the video version of this podcast too. Again, thank you for listening to the Raw Real Estate Podcast. We'll talk soon.